So, welcome to the South Asia session of Healthcare Business International 2021. We're all very pleased to see each other again after a long pandemic year. My name is Thomas Pellerin. I'm part of the global health team of IFC, member of the World Bank Group, and leading the IFC business with European companies in industrial and services, including health. So I will be your moderator for this South Asia panel at this 2021 edition. So these past 2 years have been quite eventful on a global scale, and particularly in South Asia. The vibrant healthcare industry in South Asia has been hit, has rebounded, and is transforming. So we will hear all about it from our panel of speakers today. They represent a broad range of critical actors in the region. Specialty chains like Ovum, multi-specialty operators like Evercare, healthcare operators, but also investors like Quadria Capital, and specialty care operators, but also primary care like HealthSpring. So let me welcome our speakers. Let me start by Dr. Mudit Saxena, who is the CEO and Managing Director at Ovum Hospitals. Mudit is a medical doctor trained at the SMS Medical College in Jaipur, as well as Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and also holds an MBA from the IIM in Bangalore. So Mudit started his career in health centers in rural India and has since held numerous positions in India's multi-specialty hospital chains, including Fortis, Wockhardt, before serving as a CEO of HCG and CEO of Evercare India. Our second speaker is Massimiliano Collera, also known as Max, is the CEO of Evercare Group globally, which is a healthcare platform present in Africa and South Asia, which he joined in January 2020. Prior to Evercare, Max had a long career in the health industry with global medical devices companies. His prior post to Evercare was president EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa for Smith and Nephew. Our third speaker is Dr. Amit Varma. He's a co-founder and managing partner of Quadria Capital, a health investment firm focused on South Asia, Southeast Asia. Amit is a medical doctor trained at the University of Delhi, started his career with leading roles in Manipal, Narayana, then rising to CEO of medical operations for Fortis, and then moved on the investor side by creating Quadria Capital. Lastly, Kaushik Sen is a co-founder and CEO of HealthSpring, an Indian healthcare company focused on primary care. Kaushik started his career at management consulting company Bain & Co in Boston, Singapore, opened a Delhi office, and where he rose to principal before starting HealthSpring. And Kaushik has an MBA from Harvard University. So getting to the heart of the matter, COVID, and as you can see on this first slide, COVID pandemic has hit India and its neighboring countries in different ways at different times than in Europe or the US. Less so in the first wave, but dramatically in the second wave. Has severely impacted the region. So I would like to hear, and to remove the slide, I would like to hear from our speakers about the COVID impact on their operation, how they lived it firsthand in their companies, how they've been hit, and how they reacted. So I will start with Max from Evercare. If you could briefly tell us a little bit about Evercare in your own words, and tell us a little bit about the impact that the COVID had on your operations.
Yes, thank you, with pleasure. So Evercare is an integrated private healthcare group. We're present in, as you said correctly, in Africa and South Asia. We have 30 hospitals, 16 clinics, and 82 diagnostic centers in Nigeria, Kenya, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, basically. To answer your question, how COVID has impacted. Your slide showed correctly that the first wave was less impactful than the second. And this has actually represented an opportunity for us to get well prepared when the second and more impactful wave has happened. In reality, for our business, COVID has been an opportunity to execute our vision and mission. We are an impact-driven organization. Our social impact KPIs are equally important than the financial KPIs. And when we have seen the COVID impact in India and all of South Asia, as well as in Africa, we have been among the first in standing and saying, okay, this is the time to serve the community and to take the challenge. We quickly adapted to the new reality, and in a few weeks we were able to massively invest to build more than 1,000, actually 1,200 beds and 400 ICUs, mainly in Asia, mainly in South Asia. And on top of that, we also invested in laboratories. This has been the way we reacted. Of course, I'm very proud of what our teams have done because it has not been easy. But as I said, the first wave, less impactful, gave us the opportunity to put in place the right governance guidelines, all the processes that fortunately gave us the opportunity to take care of more than 40,000 patients, COVID patients in India and the rest of South Asia, with very little casualty, no casualty at all for our employees, and with very good outcomes from a clinical standpoint. I don't know if this is the kind of overview but I'm happy to give more details in case needed.
Thank you, Max. We'll dive into the topic. I'm turning now to Amit from Quadria Capital. Just let us know a little bit, about Quadria, and again, how your hospital companies, investing companies in South Asia have been, hit by COVID, and what's been the reaction.
Thank you. I represent Quadria Capital, which is a pure healthcare private equity firm based between Singapore and India. So we invest in South and Southeast Asia. I think currently we have about $2.5 billion of assets under management. Just to be clear, all my comments are not just hospital related, because we also invest in pharma, medical consumables, and consumer health. So we unfortunately got the full spectrum of what COVID can do to us. In many ways, COVID speaks out of our playbook. We've been crying ourselves hoarse for the past 10 years that no country is investing enough in healthcare infrastructure. And unfortunately, it took a pandemic to prove that, and proved it in a devastating way. The first wave, as Max rightly pointed out, in some ways was easier. Unknown disease, unknown outcomes, no vaccines, guessing what treatments work. So we pivoted towards COVID treatment, learned a lot about the frailty of our supply chains of hospitals, curfews, lockdowns, manpower issues, you name it, we had it. We thought that we had gone past the most, and then COVID-2 came, and it was a nuclear bomb taking off. We ran out of everything, from oxygen to people to medicines. It was right there. I think, to me personally, having practiced medicine for 35 years, I can safely say that I had never ever seen or imagined this kind of a wave. The positives are that all of our hospitals are back. In fact, we keep talking about the V in economy, the V in healthcare is pronounced. And that's because of two simple fundamentals. It's not like chronic patients disappeared. It's not like strokes, cancers, and hypertension suddenly disappeared. It's that when the initial wave happened, we shut everything down. So if we look at all of our hospitals in the region now, we are back to pre-pandemic numbers. Number two, we utilize the opportunity to build robust supply chains. We'll get to that later, how we diversified from traditional markets and the way we bought things traditionally to actually doing things now differently. And lastly, we are very clear that this is not the last pandemic, which means that now we have to stay focused on making sure that our systems are resilient. And we have learned a lot more about pivoting, acute care, and making sure that we can use whatever infrastructure we have to the best effect.
Thank you, Amit, for this insightful comment. I'm now turning to Mudit at Ovum. If you could describe us a little bit Ovum hospitals and the way you dealt with COVID.
Uh, Thanks, Peter. So, Ovum is basically a single specialty chain. We do mainly five centers of excellence, which is pediatrics, neonatology, which is NICU, and then gynecology and obstetrics. And we also run a vertical in IVF. And as Max pointed out in his slide, it was one of the, I think, one of those areas when the first wave came and hit us. At that point of time, that was a low volume, but it was a duration was on a longer side. And as Amit was mentioning it, we were all caught unawares. We didn't know how it was, what it reacted. Everyone had multiple kind of theories. Uh, Epidemiologists, non-epidemiologists, doctors, non-doctors, everyone was there with an opinion on how to tackle it. From a healthcare perspective, I think from a single specialty chain, especially the product which we deal in, which is mother and child, uh, I saw a huge amount of drop, especially the first quarter of this Indian financial year. We had a huge drop in the gynecology numbers as well as obstetric numbers, and the IVF too. IVF mainly because the government had come forth with certain amount of legislation saying that uh, certain treatments which can be postponed should be looked at at a later stage, but emergency and emergent needs should be met first. And in my industry, especially with the birthing, you have a 9 month kind of a cycle. So people who are about to deliver in March, April, May definitely came and delivered, but that number had dropped down a huge, and especially with a place like we were operating out of Bangalore, that saw a huge amount of migrant population going back to their hometowns because of the fear of lockdowns, as Amit was mentioning, and people going back to their hometowns, people not being available. So as a result, the hospitals were really challenged in the first 3 months. And I think it was only around the second time, by 2 or 3 months down the line after the lockdown, that was around September, October, in the end of second quarter, the numbers started picking up. Interestingly, as Amit pointed out, most of the hospitals by the end of the financial year were almost back to their pre-COVID numbers. And interestingly, when I was discussing this with my other colleagues in the industry, they were also mentioning that with a 9 month cycle, we had a drop in the case of pregnancy because many people were not very sure whether they wanted a COVID child. So typically, people plan to not to conceive during April, May, June, and as a result of which we didn't have deliveries happening in March, April, May. Typical peak seasons in Indian scenarios. So those were the kind of shifts in which we saw in the kind of typical pattern of birthing, which resulted in NICUs. Of course, IVF numbers started again. The organization point of view, I think what happened was, being smaller organization, we are a smaller organization, so we were able to adapt very fast. It's a leaner organization, and we were also, when the second wave came, which was far meaner, we were able to actually adapt our units also, where we were able to handle not only the requirements of the people, but we were also able to address the requirements from the administrative side of the healthcare department of the government. And we were one of the first hospitals which joined hands with the government in the vaccination drives. So those were the kind of areas where we started moving around. And the thought was, as Max was saying in Evercare also, that ours is a product which moves with the people. It's a community-based product, and we need to connect with the community. And that's where it also gave us an opportunity to reconnect. Of course, at the back end, we also had to, go back to the drawing boards to relook at our business models and make them and see what are the kind of areas which we can actually improve upon. And that's a typical iceberg theory, that when the water runs down, all the things which can start getting exposed are the areas which you can start working on and get your flaws worked out.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, turning to Toshik, if you can tell us more about HealthSpring and your operation and the COVID impact.
So I'm Kaushik, I'm the CEO of HealthSpring. We are the leading corporate health, occupational health, and primary healthcare provider in the country. We spent
the first experience, the first wave of COVID, I think really trying to survive. The first few months was really about staying true to our values, to being there for the community, to fixing the things that needed to be fixed so that we could keep the company moving. Very soon, we found that COVID was actually a real validation of the primary and prevention work that we've been doing. And we started to see a significant boost in terms of what our patients were demanding of us. And as a result, we are at the stage in the latter half of the COVID cycle, I would say, where we needed to ramp up very significantly. Again, making sure that we were staying true to what the primary and prevention work that we've been doing. Our two parts of the business had very different dynamics. The employer-driven work that we did in the first few months of COVID stayed steady, and then started to see a very large uptick, as many of the decisions that companies we were working with, the cycle for closing a lot of the corporate work is quite significant. I think companies realize that investing in their employee health is really one of the most critical things they can do, and especially the kind of work that we're doing, which is really around trying to deal with COVID in the early and the moderate stage, trying to lessen the burden on hospitals to the extent possible, managing across the country, really focused on telehealth and home-based care. We saw a very large uptick in that. On the individual-driven part of our business, which is really served through clinics in two major cities, one of the first things we realized was that being present in the community and being open and being available to the members of the community at a time when there was so much fear and uncertainty around. I think that by itself really demonstrated to our patients and our members that we're there for them. At the same time, of course, we needed to find ways to become leaner. I think Mudit gave a great example. I also give a similar example when the best time to change the tires on the car is when it's come to a stop, which is really what we try to do, and we really try to re-engineer our systems and our processes. A lot of the changes were underway. I think COVID just accelerated that. I think we looked at it as an opportunity to first survive and then thrive. As a result, if I take a look at where we are today, from a pre-COVID level, we're actually, close to triple our revenue and our volume from where we were pre-COVID. I think where we are as a company is a much stronger position. We're much leaner, of course, but we feel good about the kind of work that we've done and really the kind of loyalty that we've built up with our corporate customers as well as our individual customers over the course of COVID. So it's been quite a journey. I think I've aged a lot in the last 18 months. I'm sure all of us have, but it's I really feel that the work that we do and the values that we set out to do it with have really been validated in terms of what the last 18 months has shown us.
So Trishit, in terms of if there were one or two long-lasting changes from COVID in your business model, what would they be, if there are any?
I think I would point to two things, right? I would say on the employer-driven part of what we do, I think we've really figured out a very good working model, and it is accelerated a rate of adoption that we were seeing, of course, over the course of the last few years, but it's really accelerated that. So I think that's one very long-lasting change. I think another long-lasting change is it's forced us to really look at every aspect of our business model, to get leaner, to become more digitally enabled. We talk about telehealth as one of the drivers of future growth in digital health, but there's so many other aspects of technology and so many other aspects of centralization that we ended up doing over the course, especially of the first 6 months of COVID. And that's very long-term changes to our business model. And that really changes our sustainability going forward as well.
So let me turn that question to Max, Amit, or Mudit. What are one or two long-lasting changes in your models that COVID has brought, whether it's on the revenue side, the trust side, patient, quality care, etc. Any takers?
What I have perceived is, again, what Kaushik said. There has been earlier we used to spend a lot of time convincing a patient to adopt to a maybe a telehealth or a teleconsultation model. That has become very easy now. In fact, we saw a huge amount of technology, imbibation of that among the people, which was difficult earlier. And that helped us a lot in terms of cutting down our costs also, because based on technology, you could do more number of consults per doctors and stuff like that, and you could reach out more number of people. And the other was, I think, on manpower issues, where since we became a leaner organization, we were actually forced during COVID times when our staff itself went, as frontline workers, they started suffering. We actually worked out models on how you can work with a regulated number of people and still deliver on the required healthcare deliverables. So those were the kind of two takeaways. We can now actually go back and sit and tell the teams that why can't we revert in that same model? Why can't that be more productive? Why can't we relook at that?
Max, go ahead.
Yeah, from our side, of course, all the telemedicine story, I cannot agree more with my colleagues here. I would point out for us, we have a much stronger clinical governance, and this will stay forever. Just to give you an example, clinical governance guidelines, the importance of the processes. This became the main topic of the internal discussion for long. And in parallel, also the internal flexibility to adapt to new scenarios. As I said, we built new beds up to 1,200 to serve COVID patients. But after the first wave, we were able to reconvert those beds in normal wards, normal beds in few weeks. And again, when the second wave happened, we showed a strong internal flexibility in readapting to the new crisis mode. This, for me, together with the telemedicine, are two among the many things that have changed forever.
Okay, thanks, Max. So, Amit, so you're the investor part of the panel, and we see asset class of multi-specialty hospital with a wide range of specialties under one roof, general hospitals, and specialty chains with specific, eye care, OBGYN with Mudit. How did you, and investors have preference for one or the other? Specialty has the advantage of being very lean, efficient. Multi-specialty probably has some diversification effect. As Max was telling us, there was easily be able to switch from one, create ICU beds, create beds for COVID patients, then doing bad. How do you see from the investor point of view that dilemma between specialty and multi-chain hospital? Is it worth investing in both? Or is there still, COVID has highlighted one preference for multi-specialty, for instance?
I think just to add to the previous comments made by Mudit and Max, there were three things, and if I look at it from an investor perspective, that we focused ourselves on. As most of the people on this call know, changing physician behavior is the hardest thing that you can ever execute in a hospital. So from our perspective, we utilized the COVID opportunity, as Max had alluded to earlier, to push stuff down. So all previous dogmas that this cannot be done in medicine, we've never done this in our lives, no hospital does this, we utilized that opportunity to ram that through. The second that I'd alluded to in my beginning comments was all about smartening and strengthening the supply chain. Diversify the base, start talking about a lot more generic medicines, talk about the cost of consumables, and link it back to profitability. And the third thing, we were always obsessed with conserving cash. And again, we've utilized COVID to talk about making sure that you collect cash back. So if you look at hospitals traditionally, their long lead times for collection, this is something we tightened up. Coming back to your question on multi versus single, I think it's one of those debates which is a very nice intellectual debate. It means nothing. At the end of the day, a multi-specialty hospital is the need of the hour. Our model is to put centers of excellence on a multi-specialty base. Having said that, we are also investors in probably the world's largest gastric sciences hospital, AIG in Hyderabad. When I compare the two, I have a slight bias towards single specialty because it's easier to manage, easier to operate, and it certainly is a bit more profitable for us. But can I do that by ignoring multi-specialty patients? Because no patient today comes just with a GI problem. They always come with diabetes, hypertension. So I have to take care of them. And what we did at AIG, and I think Thomas, that's the pivot, is that when we invested 5 years ago, 90% of AIG's revenue was coming from gastric sciences. We then went out and started incorporating other specialties, comorbidities around gastric sciences. And today, 50% of our revenue is gastric and 50% is other specialties, which includes cardiac and oncology.
Thanks, Amit. Mudit, you are a single specialty chains. What specialize around the birth? How do you see that impact, and do you have to maybe broaden your scale and your offering?
So I think,
Very impressed if I can jump in. I just wanted to figure
yeah.
out how did Mudit stop people's pregnancy advancing?
So that didn't happen per se. In fact, I think one thing which is very interesting here, and I must quote, is that uh, people across there were two ways in which, alluding to what uh, Amit was mentioning earlier, in terms of the revenues were maintained during the COVID times, and then I'll come to your answer, Thomas. Uh, what had happened was that, interestingly, during the COVID times, we also saw a phenomena where the insurance-based patients started taking a backseat, and so did the insurance companies also. They were actually no longer being able to hold us in terms of to work on a packages. And initial days that happened because of the huge amount of consumables being used, where we were earlier not using that much amount of consumables, and and that used to be part of the insurance packages, and it was and that's the first time when we saw and we started talking to them, saying that if we have to fight off this pandemic, you guys will have to give us that leeway, because in the interest of the patient, we will have to do that. Otherwise, we cannot be under treating our patients. In terms of coming down to a single specialty, I would agree with Amit to a certain extent, saying that multi specialty definitely makes sense because you don't put your eggs in one basket. And discussing prior to my some of my friends, it also happened that we were in an industry in India which is mother and child, and that talks about birthing. India still continues to grow at 1%, and going by the fertility rates, we are still around 2.2. So I think though it's on the decline, but that's something which is a kind of a perennial industry. And going by the current numbers, we will overtake China by 2025, and then India will be ruling as the most populous country despite the decline till 2065. So going from that numbers, definitely this would be a brand or a chain which would be continuing. This product would be growing. And of course, during pandemic time, or this time in a single specialty, it's easier to maintain or manage this because you have a specialized force workforce for this. It works like a typical model where you have single product model, where you have NICU nurses, you have delivery nurses, you have labor nurses, you have OT nurses. And similarly, in the IVF cycles, also you have an embryologist and you have trained IVF specialists. So it's a very, very specialized, highly focused industry, which really depends upon getting a clinical outcomes, which can be easily monitored, and becomes challenging when you are really looking at a multi-specialty, because there are multiple areas which you have to continuously keep focusing on. And of course, there is always a challenge in case which multi has specialties do not face, which I face, is the seasonal variances which happen. So a single specialty hospital in this scenario, definitely first 3 months, as I said, many people did not prefer to have births, and as a result of which planned births. As a result, the next 9 months, after 9 months, we had a dip or a fall. The other challenge which also happened, I don't know if someone of you would be able to share the data. India reported the maximum number of medical termination of pregnancies in the month of April and May. And that data was astounding because, and the reason was because many patients, as I said, never wanted a COVID child. They were not very comfortable having to continue with the pregnancy with not knowing the outcomes. And once again, centers like us were the places where they had to come up because of medical reasons to either abort or to continue with their pregnancies. And of course, our main aim was this. The second challenge, which also worked in favor of ours, was that a smaller organization like mine was that when the government asked us that you have to reserve 50% of your beds for COVID patients, it became a challenge for us. And at that point of time, a leaner organization or smaller organization like mine, we immediately went and told the government that we'll convert one of our hospitals exclusively for COVID patients. Can you please spare the remaining 4 centers? And that's when the government said, fine, we are okay with that. So I converted one of the centers into a COVID center. So all my pregnant COVID mothers could be delivered there, and non-pregnant women could also be taken care of there. I hired a team of physicians which could look after. Myself, I've been trained into multi-specialty managing hospitals of those nature, was able to do that. Whereas all the non-COVID continued in my COVID-free centers. So I was able to go hand in hand with the government guidelines of maintaining a certain number of beds, as well as going ahead and treating the patients, because non-COVID patients didn't want to get mixed with the COVID. So that kind of ideology and thought process among the customers was also dealt with and addressed to. So I think there was a focused factory approach, which was among the doctors and the patients, doctors and the healthcare staff workers, as well as to address the need of the patients, which was more from an external environment point of view. We were able to, being smaller organizations, we were able to address that faster, which didn't result in a revenue dip. We were able to actually do better than we would have done in our routine numbers. And it also created a small space, as I said, for people who were not able to adopt to that or faster. When they were not able to adapt it, those were the centers which actually shut down and closed down their shops. And that resulted again in the volumes going higher for our centers, because smaller centers could not take over the waves, and they had a huge amount of attritions which came in. So I think those were the kind of combined efforts which really helped single specialty hospitals, especially in birthing and neonatal births, NICUs, to survive through. I wouldn't say the same would have happened for a neurosurgery and orthopedic center. I would still be guarded, but my knowledge and my information goes that it was slightly dry over there. And so it happened with the IVF cases also. The IVF centers across India in first 6 months reported huge losses. They were not even like 30% of their numbers for the first 6 months. And it was only the last 6 months where they literally ran through and they were able to cover up for the remaining year. And they ended, like some of the leading chains in India were able to actually end up on a higher number than the previous year in terms of the number of IVF cycles they did.
Thank you, Mudit. So it looks like, definitely your operations managed to, did have a little dent, but managed to draw back up very quickly. There's an overwhelming feedback that telemedicine has been one of the key changes that COVID brought out acceleration. And I would like to call on Max.
Yeah, no. Sorry to jump, but before we close the topic, I was reflecting on the things that have changed forever, and I'm sure, and I hope that among these things is now clear the kind of role that we, as a private hospital, play and can play in front of emergencies like this. At the really beginning, in all the counties where we operate, the message from the authorities were, you stay out from this. We deal with the pandemic because this is a public issue. But then they realized very soon that the level of professionalism, or the level of service that we bring is as such that we could have helped. And this happened. So I think that in front of unlikely, but in front of possible next or future crisis, now it's clear the role of the private healthcare groups in this part of the world.
Now, thank you, Max, and you're totally right. I mean, especially in this part of the world where more than 50% of healthcare is private, it has a role to play. Even in other continents, in Europe, where private players are much smaller portion, they did their role was indeed recognized through the pandemic. That's an important point. So on telemedicine, and then maybe I'd like to hear from you, Max. Definitely, there's overwhelming feedback that telemedicine has accelerated during the COVID pandemic. Can you maybe provide us an illustration of that at Evercare?
Yeah, sure. I think, as you can imagine, when you run hospitals in cities like Nairobi, Lagos, Islamabad, Hyderabad, and so on, or Dhaka, you always, in these huge cities, you always end up in mainly focus on the neighborhood. And one of the main objectives that we have at Evercare is to get closer to the patients and serve more patients who are, distant. And for this reason, they don't have access to higher quality healthcare. So based on that, telemedicine, home care, and telemedicine digitalization was already on our table, on our plate. We were thinking about how to further improve the service and the reach. And when the pandemic happened, we were almost ready to react. In fact, in only 3 weeks in the main cities, we kicked off services in terms of healthcare, sample collection at home, and so on. Now, to be fully honest with you, I think that it worked well. We have seen quite a big number of patients, using these kind of services. But at the end, again, to be fully honest, I think that I've realized that still in this part of the world, or maybe everywhere in the world, but let me focus on this part of the world now, patients continue to prefer the face-to-face, in-present service, even when it comes to a simple OPD visit. In fact, as soon as the first wave, slowed down and we went back to almost normal service, we have seen, all these patients coming back. And although we try to push more and more the online services, we got the clear message. There is a future for this, but it's a little bit longer term than what we actually thought. And this is what we have learned. And again, I'm not skeptical. I'm fully convinced that this is the future. But I also believe that there is a longer path to follow in order to really exploit and this opportunity to reach more people at home instead of having them coming to our hospitals.
Yeah, thank you, Max. Turning to Toshit at the other end of the spectrum on the primary care, how was the use of telemedicine?
So, I'd like to just take a quick step back and talk about how we think about telemedicine and digital health, right? And I would really agree with what Max is saying, and I would add to it in a certain way, which says, I think that as we took a look at the kinds of telemedicine offerings that were being put out there, there were offerings where you could call in and speak to any doctor at any time, and the next time you called in, you would speak to a different doctor. And we really felt that the sustainable telehealth and digital health models would be the ones which took an existing doctor and multiplied the number of people that they could speak to and they could connect with. But that didn't break the doctor-patient relationship, right? So we tried very hard to create a similar situation. And I'll just give you a small example of that, right? So we, as part of our COVID management program for mild and moderate cases, we had a 10-day managed home quarantine program, right? And in that program, one of the key things that we set out to do was to say that a doctor will call you on the first day, and the same doctor will check in with you multiple times, sometimes multiple times a day, but that same doctor will be in touch with you throughout the duration of your illness. And I think that was very important because when you're already suffering through COVID, you don't want the next day to speak to a different doctor because doctors eventually are not interchangeable, right? That you get your trust and your confidence from that single person. That person may be at the end of a phone call and may be able to do a video call, but at the same time, there's a continuity that you're creating. And that's really the way that I see the future for us, certainly in telehealth, which is to take our existing pool of full-time doctors, increase the number of people that they can connect with, but at the same time, maintain that relationship with each individual person and their doctor. And that for me translates into the role of primary care, the continuity of care that we really preach and that we think is so important, and the longitudinal care aspects that come with a doctor managing your health and seeing your health outcomes over a long period of time. That to me is sustainable. I think once COVID goes away, you will certainly see, as Max said, a preference for some of those visits to happen in person. But at the same time, I think people have gotten comfortable, as long as it's the same doctor, to do some of the visits virtually, to exchange email, to exchange WhatsApps. I think our patients got very familiar with doing that with their doctors. And so some of the routine visits could end up being subsumed by telehealth. But at the same time, that doctor-patient relationship is maintained. And to me, that feels like a much more sustainable path forward for telehealth as well as for digital health.
Mudit and Amit, any feedback? Go ahead, Amit.
Yeah, just to add on to it, slightly contrarian view, and this comes from having run and continue to run various telemedicine platforms, which includes tele-ICUs, teleradiology, telepathology. My belief is telemedicine, what COVID has done is accelerated the use of telemedicine. Now it behooves us to ensure that we continue down that pathway. We also saw the pivot in healthcare at home, and we incidentally are invested in one of the larger healthcare at home companies in India, not surprisingly called Healthcare at Home. But we do more than just doctor visits, and we do things like chemotherapy, dialysis at home, providing drugs, taking tests. The doctor part of me believes very strongly that acute care patient management will still need to be done by the doctor physically, because there are many things that we pick up as doctors when a patient is sitting in front of us and we examine, which you cannot do virtually. But I think there will be a fundamental shift in chronic care where all the doctor had to do was follow up what the blood pressure readings were, what the blood sugars were, and titrate medications. So personally, I believe acute OPDs will come back. Chronic OPDs can be managed through telemedicine.
I think fair point, Amit. And
Continue the case for you at Ovum and Mudit, right?
yeah, I think Amit has a fair point there. My experience has been on telemedicine has been pretty positive in terms of in the current scenario. It accelerated adoption from both ends, from the doctors also who were initially slightly, I would say, quite distanced from it, or they were not themselves not very comfortable. So that became easier for them. They were forced to actually because of the patients or the customer demanding it. And in India, of course, there were also challenges that many of my doctors that they could not follow the dialect of the patients if they were calling from some other parts of the country. So that brought in another challenge which we were facing, and we were helping them by creating a kind of a second line which would help them to make them understand what was going on and what conversation was what was the patient saying. I think those were the kind of things. But in acute care, Amit is right to a certain extent. But in pediatrics and neonatal group, we were still able to address a part of the requirements. I won't say completely, but definitely yes, especially cases where patients were running high temperature, fevers, and URIs and stuff like that. Of course, nothing as horrific which happens in a typical ER room when we witness in terms of a patient with an angina or something, which you can actually do a teleconsult and get someone to do a balloon angioplasty on him and make him fit as a fiddle. Definitely, that interaction would still require a clinician to come and intervene and get his hands on it, the patient.
Thank you, Madit. So I have two more topics I'd like to tackle with you. But Max, you had a comment?
No.
Okay, perfect. So the one is what you pointed out, Amit, on the some of the changes on the supply chain, being looking at trust, reducing trust, having with new players coming in, especially on the drug side. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. I think we've become extremely mercenary about supply chain. And what I mean by that is that we no longer care about traditional supplies, which means that now I look at reliability, genuineness of the product that I'm buying, and obviously the price. And the turnaround times have always been pretty critical for hospitals. So whether that means online platforms such as Medica Bazaar in India, where we are investors in, which is now India's largest online consumable company, or even going out and partnering with e-pharmacies. And as you know, there's a massive wave of consolidation in e-pharmacies in India. So what we've done is local distributors and stockists still exist. We still go and buy now from online platforms, and we do it from e-farmers. And what we've realized is that the name of the game is what's happening in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Finding supplies in metros or large towns that Max was talking about, the Nairobis and the Islamabads of the world will still survive. The problem is going to be when you go 100 kilometers away from the Islamabad or Nairobi or Delhi. And that's where I believe that online channels and the whole e-sector is poised to grow. And we believe, especially as hospital owners, that should have absolutely no qualms in working with anybody who can deliver to me the reliability at the price that I want.
Thank you. Any Mudit, any comment on that?
So I think so. My view as an operator has been that we saw the emergence of supply chain programs recently, especially during the COVID times, and I think it came on two accounts. One, because we all started gravitating the hospital operators towards a well-managed inventory. Automatically, your inventory days are cut short when you come through a reputed or a branded conglomerate of suppliers, and that's what was earlier happening because it was highly fragmented between various local suppliers and dealers. And when you start dealing with these e-commerce platforms or Medica Bazaars or Supply This or a couple of other platforms, they started controlling your inventories. And in current times, if you are cash rich, there's nothing like it. And once your cash flow start getting regulated rather than getting dumped into long, 45 days, 60 days inventory, it was a tough time for all of us during the COVID times. And that was for the first time we realized that how much inventories we guys were sitting on. And that's what I made in the opening remark when I said when the water goes down, then you start realizing where all the challenges have been in the system. And that really woken up many of the CEOs and hospital operators to say that this is where they can actually save on a lot of money. Not And this conversation has been happening for quite some time. There's no doubt about that. So I think one was the cash flows, which really made us go into that area, and the other one was the supplying of the pharmacy and the products. Now, the challenge which I am finding in tier two towns, which Amit alluded to, was that many of the times when we start talking as hospital operators, we start getting feedback that the major suppliers or the e-pharma platforms definitely do, but then this aggregation which has started happening with the some of these dealers and suppliers coming together, that conglomerate has not been able to pay to the main manufacturer, and that has started resulting in our supplies going low. So I think those are the initial teething issues which people are finding in. And I think I won't be surprised that there would be a different realm of financial planning which will come in, and a finance team would start structuring this, which many of the companies were earlier foraying into oncology. Like some of the finance companies used to come and say that we will help you with onco drugs. They would now be participating into more into healthcare products across rather than this. I'm already facing a positive response in vaccines. So there's a company which will only do vaccines for us for children, and it's going to take over almost 35 to 40% of my inventory levels. And that would be a great boon for me because I sit on a cash rich heap. I just have to pay whatever is required. Inventory is managed by them, manpower is managed by them. From an organization point of view, it's a win-win for me as well as for my investor. It's a pretty good deal for him because the cash flows are not blocked, and I can easily go around looking at, returning on getting a better interest on the capital which has been invested with us.
Thanks, Mudit. So the last broad topic I'd like to discuss with you is the kind of a split between tier one cities and tier two, three cities, and how do you see this growing? In particular, I mean, today, I mean, a hospital bed per capita is quite high in tier one cities in South Asia. Tier two, three cities need some of this capacity. Some businesses have used a hub and spoke model. Some others are more directly into tier three cities. So it would be interesting to see what the models going forward and how it's been impacted. I will start with Amit, if you can open the topic.
We started doing hub and spoke before hub and spoke was the term was invented, and it wasn't by choice. It wasn't that we were very smart. It's just that healthcare is local. No patient wants to travel hundreds of kilometers to get care. The difference that we were doing earlier was that we would have smaller size hospitals with less intensity and less acuity because we just couldn't get the manpower, and quite frankly, people couldn't afford it. I think what the natural growth of the economy and what COVID has accelerated is the migration from dense metros to tier two towns in India, which by the way are large enough as the population of a Singapore. So if I go to a Jaipur or if I go to Mysore, they are as big as countries. That has led to sophistication of infrastructure on the ground, the kind of people who can afford it, the rising rate of insurance, and along with education and good jobs, people look for good hospitals. So that's what's happened. And to my mind, that's going to be the natural progression. The first step is tier one to tier two to tier three is already started. And I think within the next 5 years, you will see an ecosystem. And I think the primary care guys here are going to be the more important, the health springs of the world are going to be the most important determinants of how democratized healthcare becomes. Because at the end of the day, all of these guys, Max, me, and Mudit, while we are very focused and very proud of what we do, acute care or tertiary quaternary care is only 20% of healthcare. 80% is preventive and primary. And let's not forget that we will never be able to treat the total number of patients that we generate. We just have to prevent getting more patients.
Kaushik, let me turn to you after Amit's comment. How do you see this?
I mean, I certainly see that coming out. And you mentioned the move to tier one, tier two, tier three. Actually, where we stand right now, I would say, conservatively, 60% plus of the volume we generate is even outside tier two cities, right? So I think that, we do a lot of work in smaller cities. I think uh, I think the pandemic has done two things. One is it's really pushed people into some of the smaller cities as they've gone home from their corporate jobs, etc. And so we've had to really treat people in the smallest of small cities. I was just doing some analysis recently that we have actively been treating, of course, over the phone, but also arranging emergency care and kind of hospital admissions in about 150 cities at last count, and some of these pretty small towns. And of course, the occupational health work that we do, which is 130 odd clinics, are predominantly in tier three or rural areas, and there. As Amit was saying, I think one of the fundamental things that we've seen is that when push comes to shove, we just do not have enough tertiary care capacity in our country. We may not have, you know, 2 more decades of investment in tertiary care. We'll still, I think, still be in a situation where we are struggling in times like this to actually be able to afford the number of beds that we need. And it's really going to come down to how we can keep people healthier, how we can focus more on giving them the care at the right time, and sending them to the hospital for the right reasons at the right time, with the right level of workup and the right level of post-hospital follow-up as well. So I do think that there is a very important role to play, and there is a mindset shift. We were talking about vaccines. We've been talking about vaccines for years, delivering things like the flu vaccine and the pneumonia vaccine at our clinics and our corporate centers for the last, I would say, many, many years. And that the focus now on primary and prevention is, I think, the highest that it's ever been. I think people realize that there is a lot to be gained by staying on top of your own health. There's a lot more interest in staying healthy. There's a lot more focus on yourself. And I think those things are really strong boosters for us, but of course for the healthcare space in general as well.
Mudit, in terms of the operational aspect of going into tier 2, 3 cities for an organization like yours, how has been the challenges?
So I would just to come back to what Amit was mentioning. Amit, like when you were mentioning about tier two, and I totally agree with you in terms of the growth which happens there. I think we also at Ovum we have been operating more of a tier two model. Reason is my competition comes with a branded product line which is in tier one like Cloud9s and Motherhoods, and I work with them. But unfortunately, my model addresses a tier one or a tier two product, which is a branded product. And the philosophy which comes through is through the economic model, where I say that we all know that the almost top 10% of the Indian economic pyramid controls almost 40 to 50% of the economic wealth. And then remaining 45% is left with something about 30%. And then the remaining 25% is below the poverty line. We have been working intensively in past 2 3 years on a tier one model, and we have been able to break even in that model within 15 to 16 months. And now we have been reporting EBITDA levels at about 24% in that model, which is almost 25 to 30 kilometers away from Bangalore. And the rationale for this is that what I have always observed during my past working, whether I was with Evercare or I was earlier with HCG, was that a lot of growth is happening and viability of the model exists in these towns. Not only because of the affordability, but also there is a generation which is and a set of population which has high expectation in terms of deliverable. So when you start providing a good clinical care with an affordable population, you need to be very careful in how you price your product in this market. And once you are able to do that, definitely the volumes are the ones which change it around. And that's how we've been able to build a model there. And we have been targeting tier one models there, tier one towns there for this model, and been pretty successful in terms of, because I see that when you're going to be in metros, it doesn't make sense. So to look at the Indian economics and the economic model, one needs to be very, very vigilant on terms of how you price your product and where you go and pitch yourself. And be aware when we are talking about the opportunities which COVID has created, it has also created almost another 15 to 20 lakh population, more than that, which has gone below the poverty line this year in India. And when you have that set of population coming in, which is whether it is covered under an organized insurance plan or through a government based insurance plan, we need to be aware that there would be a dwindling population which will be aspiring for a product which is priced at a higher bandwidth. So I think these are the models when we have to continuously work on in terms of how we can go around and uh, pitch a product on that level, or pitch a product which is acceptable as well as viable. And that's what we have been successful in. And I think we learned a lot from our conversations through our as well as experience prior in my prior industry. And that's where I think in coming times we will be looking for is the growth in tier one and tier two towns. Also looking at in terms what we discussed in our prior conversation in terms of how we will be able to bring down costs through supply chains. I'm not saying that we'll be not be making ourselves viable. I think it will be making profitable for so to attract the investors so that they feel that this is the plane where we will grow in, which will be tier one, tier two. That's the opportunity. You have to put your product in the right price point, and that's where you will the growth in the Indian continent would happen. And I've seen that the same thing would have happened in Kenya and Nigeria during our HCG days or during our care times when we were looking at these models, or even when Morocco when we were looking at our looking at radiation oncology when we were looking at that point of time. I'm sure Max would have been following it up and would have more thoughts on that in terms of inputs, how he's been bracing for that areas.
Okay, thank you so much for these thoughts. So we're about close to the finish here, but I just wanted to, we talked a lot about the India context. And maybe I would like to turn to Matt, whose their group has operations in South Asia, I mean in Bangladesh, in Pakistan. And maybe you could tell us a little bit how's been the COVID lived there, and also what's the opportunity?
Sure. So in terms of what happened there, so the two waves or the three waves, we can also go to the fourth waves in some cases, have been very similar to the dynamic that we have seen in India. Now, to be to stay focused first on Bangladesh. The main difference between the Bangladesh and India situation is when it comes to private groups that are helping in dealing with this pandemic, there are very few groups, and so the opportunity to serve the population, the opportunity to serve the community is even bigger, because again, as we said, there is a public health and few private groups serving many millions of people. We went through a very unique experience because we actually we're building an hospital in Chittagong, now called Chattogram, in Bangladesh, and we were able to go through the final, say, 6-7 months, despite the lockdowns and COVID, because of the cooperation with the local authorities. And we started immediately serving a new city where there was very little, and we started from opening 80 beds fully dedicated to COVID, and we played our role there, so even creating the image of the group by serving this part of the population. In Pakistan, again, we played well our role, especially on the diagnostic side. We have now 82 laboratories. Before COVID, we had much less. I think that if I remember well, we have opened more than 30 new diagnostic centers and labs, mainly in the tier 2 cities, in order to reach, serve, and help this population throughout the pandemic. So overall, I think that if I look at these countries are followers to India when it comes to governance and standards and so on, but they're getting there. And thanks to the help of the private groups like Evercare, I think that things are quite well accelerating.
Thank you so much, Matt. So maybe I would like to, in closing, turn to each participant and ask you if you can give me one final closing comment. And I will start with Toshik.
I think COVID has really told us a few things. One is that the private sector has a strong role to play, that we put aside all of our various differences, we came together to really have an impact. And I think the one thing that we took away is that institutions that were the most flexible and were the most responsive to their customers ended up surviving and thriving over the course of COVID and having a much larger impact because of it. So I would say that those are the few key lessons that I took away from this pandemic.
Mudit,
I think COVID was a great opportunity for us to look within as an organization to see what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses. Also, kind of a pause time for us to evaluate. Also, make us think in terms of how do we want to move strategically. I think those were the important points. It was a lot of time for an organization to self-assess and understand how they want to grow. It was also a time where we could understand the need of the people, and I think many of us went beyond the call of the typical revenue cycles or profits or earning money out of it. We actually went on the basis of being a healthcare professionals or healthcare organizations, addressing the need of the people, the community, and the mankind. And I think though, and for the first time, I also felt that this was not a disease which was a localized disease. We were actually sharing our thoughts and ideas at the at a not at an international platform. It was not just a regional or a local thing. So our experiences, because the trauma was the same everywhere, so our experiences were really well shared, and it was a great kind of a binder across the globe. And it was also a kind which bound the community, but it was also a kind of a, from a business point of view, also made us look inwards to see how we will survive this uh, great calamity in times and coming times. So made us more resilient, I think, as a human being as well as an organization.
Thank you, Madid. Max, your closing comment?
Yeah, as a impact driven company, and we are for a for profit company. At the same time, we have to deliver KPIs and objectives in terms of social impact. The main lesson, and the thing that I'm really proud of, is that you have to relentlessly focus on quality, on standards, the kind of quality, putting the patients at the center. I know I'm saying the obvious thing, but in this specific situation, this has been the key to win and to continue to perform well from a financial standpoint as a private group. So again, we come out from this experience stronger, financially in a very good position, but more, we are a better organization because we have dramatically increased the quality and the standard of quality in all our hospitals because of this crisis.
Amit?
Healthcare is a fundamental right. It is as important as building bridges, ports, airports, education. The second most important point here is that healthcare cannot be done in isolation, which means it has a direct linkage to economies. And lastly, public and private will have to come together if we are going to make a dent into the massive under penetration that we have seen and have been exposed to in the past 2 years.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, Joshit. Thank you, Max. I will not add any concluding comments as you guys did it brilliantly. I thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your conversation, the quality, the exchange, and look forward to see you on HBI. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.